Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello, fellow Alliance Council members. Welcome to Great Shot Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that examines the work of Star Wars creators. I am one of your hosts, John, and with me is Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. I think that probably on top of mind right now is what we'll be talking about this week, which would be Rogue One, a Star Wars story, or part of the Star Wars anthology, or Star Wars Rogue One, depending on...
It's just called Rogue One.
Yeah, there's no
That's
Star
all
Wars...
it is. Just
yeah.
Rogue One, you know?
That was kind of surprising, I thought.
I thought it was going to be Star Wars. I thought that we were going to get the Star Wars, and then it just said Rogue One. That's what I thought, you know.
Let's do this as we build our way to our final thoughts on the movie. Instead of giving, like the final thoughts or synopses, I would like for us to look at our expectations going in, and not like what they were or anything like that, but was there anything that hit a note of expectation that you had, or was there anything that subverted an expectation that you had, or that was, just a flat out surprise?
That's an interesting question. Like, so what lived up to expectations in a sense, or surpassed them,
or was different, and so it was a neutral. It didn't surpass or fall beneath, but it just wasn't what you expected.
Yeah. I think, interesting. I mean, I think I sort of jumped to the end, and there's some stuff that they did in there which I thought was rather interesting that I wasn't really expecting in terms of, if anyone hasn't seen the movie, we're gonna spoil the hell out of it.
Yes.
If you're listening to this the day after the movie comes out, we were expecting that you've seen the movie. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. No holds barred on this one. Not at all.
Yeah. I guess, thinking about the end of the movie, I think that was really well done in a sense in terms of how it weaved into the episode 4. But aside from that, I think what I appreciated the most in the movie was the way that it sort of tied into the rest of the movie. When I say appreciate the most, I mean in terms of like what my expectations were and surpassing whatever.
Right.
I like how it really sort of tied into the entire universe, the entire canon, and not just the other movies, or even just the original trilogy, but
Yeah.
There's a lot of references to, for example, Rebels, which I was kind of surprised that they would do that. But at the same time, why wouldn't you do that? So, I guess that's what I found to be most interesting in terms of what my expectations were, and how it exceeded them in some regards.
Yeah.
In terms of subverting them, I was expecting to see a lot of scenes which I really, really liked in the trailers.
Uh-huh. You mean like
And
I
didn't.
Rebel?
Like I Rebel, or like the fact that I was wearing a shirt, which said "all the way" on it.
Yeah.
Neither of those lines are in the movie. The shot which sort of made me fall in love with the trailer. With her in the Imperial garb as those lights come up.
Yep.
Saw Gerrera saying his whole thing. What will you do if they catch you? Blah 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 blah. Basically everything. That entire character of Jyn. I mean, it's weird. Not to mention like shots of people, dodging laser blasts from AT-ATs. I mean, all of the iconic stuff that you saw in that, all of the trailer moment shots, and everything. Nothing's in that movie.
And that was, for me, the most surprising, because it was, you watch the movie and you sort of absorb it, And then, in the aftermath, as you're walking out, you're right. You sit there and you're like, oh wait, that wasn't in there. Wait, that wasn't it, because there's one shot that I fell in love. The shot that I fell in love with from the trailers was the one of Krennic holding his gun, standing obviously on the Death Star, and like staring, and like that he's waiting for somebody. There are fingerprints, of course, not even just looking at the trailers. The thing that sort of like blew my mind, there were two things that completely caught me off guard that blew my mind in a sense. One was, it was there were fingerprints of the reshoots. They really did. It was 40% of the movie at least. Mm-hmm. Like I could sit there and I'd be like, yeah, that was inserted. Yeah, that was reshot. Yeah, that was. You could tell, especially in the very first like 20, 30 minutes. There was like when they were jumping back and forth between places, I was like, oh, because you get later in the film and it's all referred to by exposition. And maybe this is just my personal taste, but I sat there and I realized that they probably inserted those things because some executive watched it and said, I don't get what's going on. We need to insert these scenes. And I would have been fine with them simply talking about what had, and like building the tension that way. And so, that was sort of something that caught me off guard. And Tarkin.
Yeah.
I figured he'd be in a scene or a shot or like one conversation, but he was like a friggin' character through the whole thing. I was like, oh, okay. And the thing is, that's not a knock, because when I realized, they went for broke with it, and I'm a fan of that. I was like, all right, you know what? Embrace it. Yeah, do it. Let's go for this.
Yeah, there's a lot of people online who are like, ooh, that looked bad, and I don't know what they mean. I was sitting there. You can tell, if you're watching for it, but like, I don't know. Like, if I didn't know that guy was CGI, would I have been like, this is weird. There's something weird about this guy. I don't think I would have. I think I would have just been like, I don't know. But
yeah.
It looks really freaking good. I guess we had a taste of it recently in Ant-Man with Michael Douglas.
Yep.
And that looked pretty good. But this, I think they really kind of like took it to another level. You think about like the last time that it was fairly prominent was probably like Tron Legacy.
Yes, and I think there another show host on the Nerd Party Network, Sean Eastridge. I talked about it with him, and he said that he had a hard time plugging into the Tarkin character because of Tron Legacy. He said it just jogged his memory about Tron Legacy. And, my reply to him was like, screw you for talking bad about Tron Legacy, and I don't care.
Oh, I took that as being like, oh, man, this reminds me of Tron Legacy. That's such a good movie.
He meant it as a jab, and he should be ashamed of himself, and I know he's listening.
Tron Legacy is fairly close to being a masterpiece.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
But I would say that I think that there's going to be some fan base splitting with this. But I think that the people that love it, this is by and large, this is what people were wanting and expecting in 1999, I think. Something where it was a very clear line of heritage, where it was in the story and how explicitly it sat within the canon with, zero room for interpretation. And I'm not saying that as a dig. I'm saying that like Lucas did his own thing and said, I'm not going to be a slave to expectation here. And with this, they very much said, no, this is a prequel the way that people want a prequel, where it's very clearly tied together.
It's funny that you should say that, because like when I was thinking about, when I was trying to put my thoughts on this movie into words, like the first thing that kind of sprung to mind was, this is the movie that, I was wanting to see in 1999, but it's not for the reasons that you're talking about. It's not for the, direct, lineage or anything like that. What it is the direction, and the fact that this movie is not a slave to the form of the saga.
Okay.
There's like a thing, and we saw it last year with Force Awakens, but there's obviously like a look to Star Wars movies, which was established in A New Hope and which is carried through. And, you compare Empire Strikes Back to any of Kershner's other movies, and you don't necessarily see any, strong connections there, because for one thing, Kershner doesn't really have a definitive style, but also because it's very much in the same style as A New Hope. Same thing with Return of the Jedi, and then with the prequels, Lucas was doing that, but with a new weird thing as well. And it's interesting, seeing like Force Awakens, and I think we talked about this last year over on Commentary Trek Stars. It's very much a JJ movie. And yet, at the same time, it feels like a quote-unquote Star Wars movie.
Yes.
This certainly feels like a Star Wars movie, too. But at the same time, I think the direction is a lot more daring. Not in the sense that it's like, oh, it's so much better directed than the other movies, but it's more its own thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that is something that both of us have been on record as saying, you more so than me. Like, it's sort of an idea that I've warmed up to, of the idea that when, a director comes in, they should be allowed to put their stamp on it. You should, even though it's a Star Wars movie, you should sit down and say, this is a J.J. Abrams movie. This is a Gareth Edwards movie. But doesn't that bring in, because we've looked at Godzilla, is there anything about this that, I know what my answer is, but is there anything about this where you would sit down and you would say, oh, that's a Gareth Edwards movie about this? Do you think that this survives the process and you can tell that this is a Gareth Edwards work? Or do you look at this and say, this is a studio work? This is reshoots and meddling?
No, I think it does definitely say Gareth Edwards. The thing that was really interesting about his style was sort of bringing a gritty realism to something which in the past hasn't had that, sort of bringing a reality to this iconic property. In the case of Godzilla, that was one thing. In the case of Star Wars, it's something else, but it's similar in a lot of ways. And also the idea of sort of combining this almost like indie documentary feel, with like handheld cameras and, camera placement and everything in terms of like making it feel like the camera is, sort of embedded in a war zone. Contrasting that with these amazing sort of like tableau shots of the entire environment from bird's eye views or whatever, or space eye views, stuff like that, where it's like this beautiful vista in a sense, very still and very perfectly composed, and kind of like showing an environment, like a cityscape or a landscape that you aren't used to seeing because it's so alien. We saw that in Godzilla a lot, where it's like, this is a familiar landscape which has been scarred by a monster. Here it's, Star Wars worlds, and I think that contrast is really interesting and very much sort of speaks to his style.
Yeah, well, I think his style comes through in a large sense during the battle scenes, because they were, for me, there was certain, sort of camera motion that was reminded me of, the army people, doing the halo jump and stuff like that. Like, I could see it there. And I think that for me, what sort of jumped out was the performances, and what I was able to, compare and contrast looking at it was Abrams got a certain type of performance out of his cast. And I think that Edwards gets a different type of performance out of his cast that is like a more emotive Lucas style.
Yeah, I can see that. One of the things I think, if you look at Lucas's dialogue, especially like in the prequels and everything like that, it is so sort of like laborious. You know what I mean? It's
It can
so
be, yes.
it's so formal, and it, even when there's jokes, I think that Lucas just really isn't that funny. You know what I mean? I mean, he's like, "Let me tell you a joke," and it's kind of like when my dad tells a joke,
Well,
where
yeah,
it's like,
but well, I mean, the whole argument with the prequels, of course, is that that's reflective of the world, and if you take the way Vader speaks in the original trilogy, like it's very much the way everybody's speaking back in the prequel era and stuff. So
okay,
that's my defense of it right there.
That's an interesting defense. That's an interesting retcon, similar to the way that they retcons the Death Star being built after we see it in Episode 2 in the Separatist hands or whatever. But I think that that's the reality? No, I don't. I think that the reality is he's just not good at writing dialogue.
Well, okay.
And here's the thing about that, right? And this is why I bring it up, because what you see in this movie and in Force Awakens and in the original trilogy is, what we think of as better performances, what we think of as more naturalistic performances, and I think a lot of that has to do with, what's being said. I mean, if it's
no. This is the thing is I'm not like disagreeing with you. I'm not doing this like laborious fanboy defense of Lucas. Okay, I think that the prequels, they evoke a mood that they're supposed to evoke, and I think that the dialogue contributes to that, whether by design or like it's just a bug inherent in the system. Whatever, that's fine.
Yeah.
I do agree with you that the dialogue in this flows much snappier. It's more reminiscent of the original trilogy because it has more of that energy to it. That to speak to your point about the jokes, yes, when she shoots the droid and then K2SO comes out of the corner and he says, "You thought that was me," like that is more original trilogy-esque. I'm not like dismissing your point, and I have no intention to die on the hill of Lucas' defense with the dialogue stuff. I'm just adding a note there.
Yeah.
But the question I have, because of how much we can tell just from the previews that was reshot, is when I watched it, one of the impressions I got was that I was watching Edwards' work, and then there was this layer over top of it of other people's work, like just like sitting on top of it. So like his stuff would peek through, and I almost feel like I could sit down with it and say, okay, that was Edwards heavy. That was Edwards heavy. Oh, that's where somebody else was behind the camera, and Edwards just said, okay, well, I'll edit it in, or something like that. I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not, but I very much got the impression, and I'm going to keep going back to the opening. Like that first, like it opens beautifully, opens wonderfully, and then it jumps around for a bit, and it was just, and I won't lie, the first really disorienting thing for me was being in a Star Wars movie. They have always jumped from place to place. Okay, they've always had, the prequels especially. The joke on set I remember was that it like 40% of the movie was on landing pads.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was all shots. Take a drink every time a ship either takes off or lands.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but with this, seeing that overlay of like telling you what planet you were on. Especially when they were like, we have to go to Scarif. We got to get to Scarif. And then they fly there and it's like, Scarif. I was like, I'm not stupid, okay? I understand what's happening right now. Like I those sorts of overlays just really, it doesn't destroy the movie. It doesn't make me dislike it. But I was like, do we really need this? This doesn't belong here, sort of thing. Do you think I'm just holding on to an expectation of a Star Wars movie at that point?
I mean, maybe it definitely, like, when I saw that stuff, I was like, wow, this is different, and I think maybe that's part of the reason why they did it, was to just be different. But I think it did help in a lot of ways. I think it's weird that there's one missing when you think about it.
Yeah, Mustafar.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't say, and I'm like, guys, you broke your conceit here.
Yeah, I know that was weird. The thing that's stood out to me more than that, I think, is the fact that there were no wipes in between scenes.
Yeah.
Star Wars is known for having very elaborate wipes when they're going from one location to the next, and there was none of that here, which was, I mean, it's a bold choice, but it's really kind of speaking to the whole idea of, like, this is going to be different, this is going to be its own thing. We don't have to follow the rules anymore, and that's what's really kind of exciting about it to me.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the writing, the dialogue is crisp. I just looking at it, the fact that the story by, and we went over this, in our first episode, like, Noel gets a story credit, Witta gets a story credit, and then it's Weitz and Gilroy.
Yeah,
and it is really interesting to me because I would almost want to go through some more Weitz and Gilroy movies and watch them and analyze them, because I think you could tease out probably who, like, I could tell you, like, who was responsible for what, in terms of the dialogue or something like that.
Yeah, I kind of like when, because they had the world premiere, and I was on Twitter, and I was cautious about no spoilers, but at the same time I was kind of, like, interested in people's reactions to it. And at one point someone said something like, oh, the way that it weaves into episode 4 is really interesting, and I don't even know how they did it at times. And when I read that, I was like, oh no, I read too much, because what I started thinking about was Bourne Ultimatum, and how that movie ties into the Bourne Supremacy, the one right before it.
Yeah.
And both of those movies were written by Gilroy, and I'm like, did he do that? Did he Bourne Ultimatum, Rogue One? And he didn't, and that was actually kind of disappointing. But but yeah, I was kind of expecting something like that, but that's not what happened. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I would like to watch more Gilroy stuff, but I'm wondering if maybe it's just, Gilroy, I think, probably is kind of like, Carrie Fisher in a sense, where he's like a script doctor and everything, and he'll come in and do stuff, in order to fix things. And what she has said about that, which I think is probably true of most people who, get hired for these jobs, is, it's not your job to put your own stamp on it. It's your job to, sort of like fit into whatever box has been established.
Okay.
I mean, but who knows exactly? I mean, with 4 writers, and there's other uncredited writers. We know that Christopher McQuarrie did work on it.
That's true.
One person who he didn't mention in that first episode is Scott Burns, the guy who wrote Contagion. He apparently worked on the script too. So, I mean, who knows?
Well, now here's a question. This is a question I wrestle with, because I don't know what the answer is, because for somebody who's not deeply steeped in Star Wars lore, okay, Force Awakens has tremendous cross-audience appeal. Even if you're not a Star Wars fan, like it's sort of like when JJ did, Star Trek '09. Even if you're not a Star Trek fan, you're going to have a good time. And Force Awakens, I think, operates on the same level, and that's why it made, $2 billion. Do you see Rogue One having that same crossover appeal, or is this strictly fans apply, and maybe we'll catch a couple of you on the outset, but most people are going to come in and be like, like, where do you think this lands?
I think it probably does land more on that end of the spectrum. I mean, just speaking from, personal experience, I was talking to a coworker who was, he hadn't seen any Star Wars movies as far as I know, right? And he watched it, and he came out of the movie, and he's like, I have no idea what was going on in that thing.
Yeah.
He had absolutely no idea.
Right, and I think that is, that it doesn't bother me. It doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the film, but at the same time, something I've always enjoyed about the previous 7 is that, well, 8 technically because of Clone Wars, but I think Clone Wars falls into the same category where if you're not a diehard fan, good luck. But like with the other 7 episodes, I could sit down and I could put on Empire Strikes Back for somebody. I could be like, watch this, and at the end they'll be like, oh yeah, more of that. What's going on? Mm-hmm. I still contend I could do the same thing with the prequels, but everybody tells me I'm nuts. But I don't think that I could bring somebody who's not a diehard fan into this. I think that there is so much about this that is, and I don't know how much of it was what Edwards brought in or how much of it was, forced on by Disney in terms of, the fan service. Like that's a question for me.
I think most of the fan service stuff is stuff that, you can go either way, I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff in there where, as a fan, you're like, oh, hey, look at that, so cool. But as just a regular viewer, you'd be like, whatever, that's obviously just some extra in the background or whatever. It doesn't matter.
There's actually a very interesting discussion because I was having a conversation with somebody who, beat up on The Force Awakens for all of the allusions to the original trilogy that it had. Mm-hmm. Saying, oh, well, this was reminding me of the movie. It wasn't. I think that am I out of my mind? I thought there were just as many callbacks in this. Was that shot of R2 and 3PO even necessary?
Yeah, there were just as many callbacks, but I think most of them were integrated more naturally. Like, okay. There were two in this movie where I was like, come on, guys. One was when you see, Pondo Baba. And,
that,
the other dude.
That for me was, and just to give everybody a piece of reference, that one of the thing I had to sort of come to peace with in Force Awakens was the holographic chess thing. I thought they lingered on it too long. When I saw Evazan and Ponda Baba, I almost like disconnected from the movie entirely. I was like, this is wasting my time. This is not necessary. Why would they be on Jeddah and they're going to be in the next movie on Tatooine? Why would I see them in the next movie? Especially when you weigh in the fact they just happened to have left Jeddah before the Death Star blew it up. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Like, what's the timing on that? Having them in that city actually creates a story inconsistency in a sense, unless they were like walking right back to their ship. So I guess we need an anthology movie that is the story of Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba, so I know how they got off of Jeddah.
I'm sure there's going to be a comic book series coming out very soon explaining this. But, I mean, that to me didn't really bother, because at first I was like, wait a minute, why are they? But then it's like, okay, they're in a city which is basically inhabited by, truck drivers in space. This is.
It just wasn't necessary.
I mean, it was because it's like, hey, look at this. There was that. The other thing was, R2 and 3PO, where it's just like, oh, hey, they were able to shoehorn them into this movie.
Right.
Those were the only two things. But most of the stuff in here was stuff that I thought was integrated really well, like, Mon Mothma and, Bail Organa.
Mon Mothma was a part of it from the beginning. Bail Organa, I go back and forth. I think that he was there in a later part of the film, but I think they went back and shoehorned him in because the first time that Mon Mothma is like the scene where I Rebel was taken out of, Bail Organa steps out of the shadows, and there's this shot of like Jin looking at him, and then they go back and he doesn't say anything, he doesn't interact, you don't see him in any other shots.
I think there was, because I remember the first time when people were like, Bail Organa's in the movie, there was like some sort of like reaction shot of like a crowd like outdoors, I think probably on Yavin, where like someone in the background turns and they're like, look, that's Jimmy Smits, and everyone's like, that's not, maybe that's Jimmy Smits, but you can't really tell, So in that scene, I don't think was in the movie, but I don't know. I mean, that could be, but that doesn't really bother me so much. I'm
not saying it bothered me. I'm just saying that like I could tell that it was, pieced in there.
Maybe a better example would be, using those guys, the different pilots in.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought
Yeah,
it
that
was a
took me
nice
out of
nod.
it for.
And I mean, it's okay. I can forgive that or whatever. I mean, the things that bothered me in Force Awakens were things like the chess set, or like pulling out the probe, the
No,
test
see
probe
the
thing,
pulling out
and,
pulling out the probe, I was fine with. That's the type of callback where I'm fine. The only problem I had with the chess scene, I had no other problem with it except for the fact that it went back and it had 2 shots of it, and the second one lingered and panned up. I was like, you're taking too long with it. Like that's you're.
I mean, I think they did the same thing with the probe. If he would have just because he's like taking things out of the bag, and if he would have just taken the thing out, and it's like, hey, there goes the probe, but he's like, what is this thing? Oh, I don't know, and then throws it off to the side.
It lasts for like half a second. That one was no problem at all.
It's about a quarter second too long.
I mean, they have a probe droid floating by in the background. When they're going around, but it's not like even a different model. It's the Empire Strikes Back probe droid.
But that's fine because it's like, they make those and they're gonna have those things.
Oh, sure,
around.
sure. But and the thing is, I'm not like trying to step on the movie. I'm just saying, like, I really think there was just as much. I find it interesting because people will beat up on one thing for callbacks, but they will not beat up on another thing for callbacks. They won't even beat up on, and nor should they, Revenge of the Sith for Chewie doing the Tarzan yell the way he did in Return of the Jedi during a battle situation.
Will you beat up on it for having Chewie in that movie at all? Because I would.
I wouldn't. I understand the argument for why he wasn't necessarily necessary, but I didn't mind it.
It's like Yoda's like, I have good relations with the Wookiees, so I'm going to go to Kashyyyk. And on an entire planet full of Wookiees, Yoda's hanging out with like the king of the Wookiees and Chewbacca, because why not, right?
Hey, Chewbacca's the coolest damn Wookiee that ever existed, and I will not have you. No.
What about what's his son's name?
Lumpy? I don't think Lumpy was born by that point.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Lumpy's too young in the Star Wars holiday. What they should have had is Itchy.
Yeah.
It should it should have been Tarful and Itchy, but I think Farewell Itchy wouldn't have sounded as well.
Perhaps not. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Now, one of the things we haven't really looked at Star Wars editors yet, but one of the credits that you pointed out to me that I missed initially was additional editing by Stuart Baird.
Yeah.
Who is a legendary editor for being known for, I believe you said in Mission Impossible 2, he literally edited the poop out of it.
Well,
he excised everything bad.
Yeah, I mean he's a very well established editor in his own right. He edited Superman the movie,
Skyfall.
He edited Skyfall, Casino Royale.
Yeah,
I mean he's a very, very good editor on his own. But one of the things which he a niche which he found is fixing movies that have problems with them. I actually, when I was in film school, I had a teacher who was an assistant editor in Hollywood, and she talked about how Stuart Baird was like the editor in residence at I think Paramount or something like that. I'm pretty sure it was Paramount, and basically, if a movie was having problems or whatever, he would just go in and tinker with it. I mean, that was like his job, and that's what he was sort of like known for being really good at is fixing movies that have problems. And you'll see this credit in a lot of movies, like additional editing by or associate editor, that kind of thing. And lots of times it's people who are like very well established editors who have been brought in to maybe smooth out some rough edges. And he did this very famously with 2 movies in quick succession back in the early aughts. One was Mission Impossible 2 and the other was Lara Croft Tomb Raider. And as a thank you for fixing 2 of their big blockbusters, Paramount gave him the directing gig on Star Trek Nemesis. And the rest is history, So I'm thinking that there's a scenario here where, Rogue One is in some trouble, so they call in Stuart Baird to fix it. He does, obviously, because everyone loves the movie. And, Boba Fett, directed by Stuart Baird, coming to you in 2019 or whatever it is.
But does everybody love the movie? You have your finger on one pulse. I have a finger on another pulse. Of the people you have spoken to, what is the net reaction? Is it breaking even, where some people hate it, some people love it? Or is it net positive, where a lot of people love it? What's it feel like from your perspective?
Everyone that I've talked to has loved it. My wife, was just saying yesterday, my wife's not a huge Star Wars fan. She and her Star Wars fandom tends to skew to some weird places. I mean, Empire Strikes Back is her favorite, no doubt. After that, it's like Force Awakens, and then, it was, I think, Revenge of the Sith, but I think she's placed this ahead of that. She's like, those are basically she said last night, she's like, Empire, Force Awakens, this, and Revenge of the Sith. All the other movies can burn.
Interesting. That is definitely an interesting perspective. So
she liked it a lot. My friend Matt, who I saw it with, and my friend Zach, who I saw it with, they both liked it a lot as well. That seems to be the general reaction. I did see one little kid coming out of the theater. He must have been about 7, and he was walking with his dad, and they're walking out of the theater, and he goes, "That movie was terrible."
Bless him for being an independent thinker. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. He is not going to bow to peer pressure. That kid's got a future.
Yep. So what about the people who you've talked to? What did they say?
It's really interesting because there's one person who has apparently fallen in love with it. Actually, another host here on the Nerd Party Network. If you pay attention to our Facebook page at facebook.com/the Nerd Party, you will have seen Matt Rushing's review, and he effusively praises it. He thinks it's the bee's knees, as it were. And I've spoken with another host I mentioned earlier, Sean Eastridge, who had a more tepid take on the film and was like, yeah, that first act was really kind of a mess. And I can't completely disagree with him. I can say that I saw it on the opening Thursday, and then I saw it the night after, while we're recording this. And my reaction the second time was better. I think that probably because I knew what to expect from the beginning. And so I was like, yeah, okay. I don't like the way that this is, pieced together in the beginning, but, I'll get over this. I know that it gets better. Because it really does smooth itself out and flow a lot better once you get past that first 30 minutes. But one of my daughters was able to go with me. The other one was sick. To the second showing, and she has ranked it. Force Awakens is her favorite, and this is number 2, and Revenge of the Sith is number 3. So,
wait, what's number 2?
Number 2 is this, Rogue One.
Oh, okay.
Number 1 is Force Awakens. Number 2 is Rogue One. Number 3 is Revenge of the Sith for her. And we went through the whole list of everything that that she loves and everything. I just, I have to admit that I went into this with absolutely nothing support. I didn't read Catalyst. I stopped watching previews. I muted the living bejeebers out of this on Twitter. Okay. Yeah. I got to know. I have to ask this question. Did Catalyst help your enjoyment of this film at all?
It's interesting, and I think that we should do a show. Honestly, I don't know if you're planning on reading Catalyst, but I would love to have a conversation about the difference between how this movie and how Catalyst plays, having seen the movie first or read the book first, because, having the two different perspectives. I mean, I was texting you like when I was reading the
Yes.
book and basically saying like, boy, everyone's saying like, you have to read Catalyst before you see Rogue One. And I'm like, I have a feeling, I sent it to you. I'm like, I bet you could tell me the plot of Catalyst.
Oh, that's right.
From having seen the trailers to Rogue One, I was very much. I mean, I thought that the book was fine, but at the same time, I'm like, what is the point of this?
I have
Seriously.
a feeling that Catalyst probably stays focused on a couple of things. One of them probably being the animus and competitiveness between Krennic and Tarkin. That's probably one of the major threads. Probably because it's named Catalyst, it has to do with Galen Erso's discovery of what is going to make the Death Star tick, just based on the title, and that's probably the two big things I'm willing to bet. Am I in the ballpark here?
You've pretty much nailed it. I mean, I would say that the main thing, and which a lot of people have been praising, is that it really develops the relationship between Galen and Krennic.
See, I got enough of that from the opening scene of this, though. Like, I felt that the dialogue and the performance was enough. Like, that was the thing, is if there's one thing that I wanted more of out of this film, it was more Krennic. Because I liked the character. I liked the way he was performed. I liked the way he was written. And in a sense, I will always wonder, did they sacrifice some of him to have resurrected Tarkin? Like, would it have been a different experience? Would it have been a better experience, for lack of a better word, if Tarkin didn't show up until the end and said, I'm taking command of this thing? And then Krennic being like, oh, screw you, I'm going off. And then, basically Tarkin assassinates him while he's out on the tower or something. Like, it almost feels like Krennic got robbed of a spotlight.
See, I don't know. To me, if they would have done that, I would have just been like, oh, obviously the only reason why they did that is because they needed a proxy for Tarkin, since there's no way that they could, get Peter Cushing back in this movie. There's no way that you could have Tarkin in this movie for more than a shot or two, right?
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a problem with that, with their relationship or the way that that plays. I mean, it's interesting because, like, I mean, I sent those texts to you where I was like, this is completely pointless. Catalyst is very much not something which you need.
I don't remember if it was a text or if it was a tweet where you said, I don't know why I keep wasting my time with these things.
I think that might have been a text.
Sorry, I didn't mean to out you there on that one.
No, that's okay. But, what's interesting is in that very first scene, right, where you see, Krennic show up and he starts having the conversation, and you see, Lyra and Jin, because Lyra plays a big role in the book as well, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't help but, think about the book, and as I was watching the scene, I was like, wow, I'm really kind of glad that I read that book, because it's going to make this scene play much better. Like, having that backstory and everything, I really felt like that scene was an extension of the book that I had just read. Now,
Interesting.
What's interesting about that, I guess, is that's the very first thing you see, and I'm like, wow, oh yeah, I feel like this is, the next chapter in the book. I'm really glad that I read the book. After that first scene, it does not make any difference at all. It does
True.
not add anything to the rest of the movie, but it adds a lot to that one scene at the very beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Okay. So read a whole book for one scene.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Connected universe.
I mean,
Hashtag
there's
connected
some cool
universe.
stuff, like, because all of these books and some other things like the cartoons and stuff too have been sort of like, dancing around the idea of the Kyber crystals and them
Yeah.
being used for the Death Star and everything like that. And obviously that plays a big role in Catalyst. I mean, when they actually said the word like Kyber crystal in Rogue One, I was like, what? You mean you're actually going to talk about this thing that's been in the expanded universe, canon, new canon for, the past like 2 years or whatever it is? We're actually going to deal with this in a real movie?
Kyber crystals are that's original. If you go all the way back to Splinter the Mind's Eye,
Yeah.
that was a Kyber crystal.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
there was in some of the original treatments of the movies, Kyber crystals played a large role, at least by reference. Including the Kyber crystals is a very cool thing, and I think that's the type of callback that I like most. One of the things that I was very glad about is when she was watching the hologram and he says, I've built a weakness in the Death Star. I was like, I swear to God, if you say exhaust port, I'm done. I'm walking out of this because I'm done with decades of people devaluing the fact that Luke basically did a miraculous thing and saying, oh, well, anybody could have made it because somebody else took that shot and they didn't make it. It's because they didn't have anyway. The fact that he highlighted that the weakness was a concussive blast to the reactor would cause the whole system to fail. He didn't say you have to shoot down he just said, just hit the reactor somehow. Right. I'm like, okay, that sets up, you could infiltrate it. You could do whatever you want with it to get in there. So here's a question with the tie-ins. Do you think that those were native to it? Or do you think that they were later sort of editing retcons that they threw in there?
I think they were native to it. I mean, a lot of the reason why I think they were native to it is because of who was doing the revisions and everything. I get the impression that Tony Gilroy has never heard of a Kyber crystal up until he read the third draft of this screenplay.
That's a fair point.
But like I saw Gary Whitta, I was so happy for him because like you see him, he's been on Twitter like nonstop since the premiere, basically just living the dream, here and everything, and he's been, rather open about, the process and everything like that. He's like, some people were, rather critical of me for, some opinions that I had about the prequels, back in the day or whatever. But, for this movie, I put in a whole bunch of stuff from the prequels, and everything else. And the fact that he writes for Rebels, he's written 2 episodes now and everything like that. I mean, I think that it was definitely built in from the beginning. I mean, I think it was Pablo Hidalgo said, Rogue One has references to everything from the original. Right.
He said there's no split in the timelines. It's all one giant.
Right. He said that's how
they draw from.
That's how the filmmakers were treating it. They saw them as all just stories, and
right.
Yeah, I mean, I buy that. I think it's cool that they did that. Because I mean that's it makes sense. It lends legitimacy to these other sort of like secondary projects.
Now, as sort of a final thought, we've talked about editing, we've talked about Edwards, we've talked about the writing. In terms of the cinematography, we've mentioned the camera work. Was there anything about this where you would sit down and say, I can tell this came from the guy who did Zero Dark 30? This is a Greg Fraser movie.
I mean, there's some stuff, although I have to say not nearly as much as I had anticipated, I mean, there were times where I was like, oh, yeah, that feels like Zero Dark 30 or whatever. But for the most part, I was kind of like, it's really well shot, but it has its own kind of unique style, which is not very similar to Zero Dark 30 in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I think that maybe the color palette, that kind of thing. But, I mean, obviously the budget was much larger. And, I mean, one of the things that really kind of stood out to me was, like the fact that they shot it in that Ultra Panavision 70, which seeing that credit at the end of the movie was just like, oh God,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful. But I really liked the way that the movie looked because of that, the way that the lenses, had that sort of like anamorphic distortion, a lot of the lens flares and everything I thought were gorgeous,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what really kind of stood out to me more than anything was that. What about you?
No, I thought I could detect a bit of it in the in the battle sequences, like the running around with the troops and everything. I was like, yeah, okay, I could see sort of a connective tissue, even though one is daytime. But yeah, I think by and large there was this. I would be more tempted to say this looks like a Gareth Edwards movie than this looks like a Greg Fraser movie, and I think that was one of my questions when we were talking about Zero Dark 30 was, how much of a hand was Fraser going to have in the look versus Edwards, and how much collaboration. And I think that it is a collaboration, and I think that, but I still think that this has that Edwards stamp to it. This looks like he did it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Fraser, he's got a new movie coming out, like a Mary Magdalene movie coming out next year.
Really?
Yeah, which he shot. I don't think he used these lenses, but he did shoot it in the Alexa 65 thing, and I don't know. I'm curious to see if that how much of an impact this movie had on his later work. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will, and I would say that we would be interested to know what other members of the audience have to say about it. What did you see, going on the journey with us up to this point to, the journey to Rogue One, if we can reuse a marketing line. So, reach out to us on the nerdparty.com/contact and, look up, Great Shot Kid. Let us know, was there something stylistic that jumped out at you where you said, oh, wow, that, hey guys, we talked about this and you missed that. Maybe we'll have to do something about the score and what did we see that was very Giacchino-esque brought into this Star Wars universe, because obviously the score sounds different. You can also go ahead and reach out to the network itself on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. And Mike, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me on Trek.fm doing From There to Here, which is our daily rewatch of Star Trek, where we look at all 729 episodes over the span of the year.
So close to the end, Mike.
Yep. Stay on target. And and then you can also find me on Trek FM doing Stage 9, which is a show about the people who make Star Trek, along with John Mills.
Yes, we do Stage 9 over on Trek FM, and that is a hoot and a holler. And speaking of Stuart Baird, who worked on the Bond franchise, we just covered Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, with Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah, Michelle Yeoh. You can also find me here on the Nerd Party Network doing Aggressive Negotiations with Matt Rushing. You can find me over co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. And if you want to find me online, just look for Kessel Junkie. That's where I am, where I will tell you that you would be very wise to go to lootcrate.com/nerdparty and use the code nerdparty to get yourself a nifty little subscription to Loot Crate, where you get a box of goodies sent to you once a month. Sign up for a year. Give yourself a little holiday treat in honor of having seen Rogue One on this wonderful journey through an annual Star Wars masterpiece, I guess. So tune in next week when we're going to bring you a little treat where Mike and I are going to divulge to everybody, if we were running a film festival and we were doing a double feature series, what we would pair up with the original Star Wars trilogy and why.